The Prilorian plasma bolt tore through the German shepherd's body, vaporizing flesh and bone in a blinding flash. Thor was dead before he hit the ground, his existence snuffed out by alien invaders who saw the dog as just another dumb Earth beast. They didn't know, couldn't know, the depth of love between a man and his dog, a bond unbreakable even by death. But the aliens were about to learn the hard way not to fuck with a human's best friend. Will Phillips clutched his fists, knuckles white as he watched the smoking crater that used to be his loyal companion. His vision went red. An all-consuming fury bubbled up from some primordial depth in his soul, demanding vengeance, demanding blood. But before he could tear the Prilorians apart with his bare hands, their leader shot him with a neural stunner. Electricity arced through Will's nerves, his muscles seized. Darkness took him. When Will awoke, he found himself chained in an alien brig as the warship hurtled through space. His captors spoke in hisses and clicks, mocking the weak, primitive human. But Will understood one thing clear as day. These fuckers had no clue who they were messing with. No idea about the depths of human wrath they had just provoked. They thought the war was over, that Earth was beaten. Will would show them how wrong they were. He'd show them what it meant to murder a human's dog. He'd rip their fucking hearts out and make them choke on their own blood. He'd send a message to the whole Prilorian Empire. Don't ever touch our pets. But first, Will needed to escape and warn the colony before the aliens invaded in force. If he failed, millions would die and harvest would fall. The fate of every man, woman and child rested on him. Failure was not an option. Will began to plan even as the aliens beat him and darkness took him once more. They would all pay, every last one. Will would make sure of it. Will's eyes snapped open. His head, pounded like a jackhammer, was drilling into his skull. The cold metal floor of the alien cell pressed against his cheek. He pushed himself up on shaky arms, scanning his Spartan surroundings. Featureless metal walls, a heavy door with no visible handle. A prison, then. The last thing he remembered was the stunner hitting him, electricity searing through every nerve, and before that... Thor? Blasted into atoms by Prilorian plasma. Fury rose in Will's chest like magma threatening to consume him. They'd pay for what they did. Every last one of those alien bastards would pay in blood. Something glinted in the corner of the cell, catching Will's eye. A twisted shard of metal, sharp along one edge. He snatched it up, gripping it tight enough to draw blood. The door hissed open. In strode the Prilorian commander, Tharos, flanked by two guards. The aliens towered over Will, all sharp angles and battle-scarred carapace. Tharos fixed his compound eyes on the human, mandibles clicking. "The outpost, human," Tharos hissed. "What is its purpose? What do your kind know of our movements?" Will met the alien's gaze, his own eyes hard as flint. When he spoke, his voice was a low growl. "Why'd you kill my dog, you son of a bitch?" Tharos scoffed, a rasping rattle in his throat. "Your primitive beast, a mercy putting it out of its misery. You'll suffer far worse if you don't start talking." Something snapped in Will. The fury that had been building in him erupted. With a wordless roar, he lunged at Tharos, jagged metal aimed at the alien's throat. Tharos reacted with blinding speed. His clawed hand shot out, catching Will's wrist, but the human's momentum carried him forward. The metal shard slashed across Tharos's arm, biting deep. Viscous green blood welled from the gash. The guards were on Will in an instant. Blows rained down, driving him to his knees. Chitin-armored fists pummeled him until he collapsed, gasping and bleeding. Tharos loomed over him, one hand clamped over his wound. Rage burned in the alien's eyes. "I've just cost yourself any mercy, human," Tharos snarled. "I'll have the location of your outpost and the access codes, and anything else in your feeble primate brain, and you will beg me for death before I'm done." The commander stormed out, leaving Will with the guards. At a chittered command, they hauled the human up, slamming him against the wall. Clawed hands tore at his clothes. Something glinted in the harsh light. A blade. Will's screams echoed through the corridors of the ship. On the bridge, Tharos studied the slash on his arm. The human would pay for that. Oh yes, it would pay. The console chimed, dragging him from his vengeful thoughts. A message from High Command scrolled across the screen. Commander Tharos, we have monitored your interrogation. We suspect the human may have critical information about our operations in this sector. You are to bring it to Shadow Bastion for advanced questioning. Coordinates to follow. Do not fail us. A slow smile spread across Tharos's face. He would not fail. He would rip every scrap of intel from the human's mind, and he would savor its screams. Set course for Shadow Bastion, he ordered the helm. We have a delivery to make. The UES Retribution cruised along the edge of Prilorian space, engines thrumming with restrained power. On the bridge, Captain Nolan Briggs stood ramrod straight, his hard eyes scanning the tactical displays. He cut an imposing figure in his crisp uniform, all sharp angles and coiled strength. An urgent ping sounded from the comm station. Briggs strode over, leaning in to read the message. It was from Governor Fairchild at Harvest Colony. Will Phillips, their chief mining engineer, had vanished on a wilderness survey and was feared captured by the Prilorians. Briggs's jaw clenched. Phillips knew every detail of Harvest's selenium mines, a critical resource for the human war effort. If the Prilorians broke him... "Get me Central Command Priority 1 channel," Briggs barked. Moments later, the flickering hologram of Admiral Iverson appeared. Briggs snapped a salute. "Admiral, we have a situation. One of our key personnel on Harvest has been taken by the enemy. He has vital intel that could turn the tide of the war." Iverson's brow furrowed. "You have full authority, Captain. Recover our man or make damn sure the Prilorians don't get anything out of him, by any means necessary." "Understood, sir." As the hologram winked out, Briggs turned to his helmsman. "Set course for the Prilorian frontier, flank speed, and get our Marines prepped for action." Light years away in the bowels of Shadow Bastion, Will Phillips screamed. Tharos loomed over him, compound eyes glittering with malice. Needle-sharp probes burrowed into Will's flesh, pumping him full of psychotropic drugs. Agony seared through every nerve as a neuronic array fired relentless impulses into Will's brain. Memories flashed unbidden, the selenium mine layouts, access codes, defenses. Will gritted his teeth, fighting to bury the information under mental static. "You only prolong your suffering, human," Tharos hissed. "Your primitive mind cannot resist forever." Will forced a bloody grin. "Give it your best shot, you overgrown cockroach." Snarling, Tharos ramped up the neuronics. Will convulsed, a hoarse scream tearing from his throat. But he wouldn't break. He couldn't. Thor's face swam in his mind's eye, those loyal brown eyes, that doggy grin. As the torture ratcheted up, Will retreated deep into memories of his beloved dog, teaching Thor to fetch as a roly-poly puppy, exploring the hills and forests of Harvest together. That time, Thor spooked a herd of alien cattle, and they had to run for miles. The recollections wrapped around Will like armor, shielding his mind from Tharos's relentless assault. He would endure this. He would survive. And then he'd make this sadistic fuck pay for what he did to Thor. Hours later, the guards dumped Will back in his cell, battered and bleeding but unbroken. In the moments before unconsciousness claimed him, Will whispered a prayer to the friend he'd lost. "Miss you, buddy. Hope you can hear me wherever you are. I won't let you down. I'll make it home for both of us." With Thor's face in his thoughts, Will slipped into the merciful darkness. The sensor array on the UES Retribution pinged with an urgent alert. Captain Briggs leaned over the console, his brow furrowing as he studied the readout. The energy signature was massive, dwarfing anything they had encountered before. As the ship dropped out of FTL on the edge of Prilorian space, the source of the reading came into view. Briggs felt his blood run cold. It was a Prilorian dreadnought. The behemoth warship loomed against the starfield, bristling with plasma cannons and shielded missile batteries. It was twice the size of the Retribution, a floating fortress with enough firepower to reduce a small moon to molten slag. "Mother of God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Reeves, the tactical officer. "What the hell is that thing doing here?" Briggs stared at the dreadnought, his mind racing. The Prilorians only deployed their heaviest warships to guard targets of vital strategic importance. high-value shipyards, major staging areas, or secret installations like Shadow Bastion. A cold certainty settled in Briggs's gut. This was where they were holding Phillips. It had to be. And if they didn't rescue him soon, the Prilorians would break him, and Harvest would fall. Briggs turned to his crew, his expression grim. We have to assume that's where they're keeping Phillips, and we can't let them extract those mining codes from him. Sir, with respect, said Commander Nash, engaging that dreadnought would be suicide. We need to call for reinforcements. Briggs shook his head. There's no time. If we wait, they'll rip those codes out of Phillips's head, and then this war is over. He met Nash's gaze, his eyes hard. I'm taking a team to get him out. You have the con. Nash swallowed, then nodded. She knew better than to argue when Briggs had that look. Aye, sir. Briggs strode off the bridge, already keying his comms. Sergeant Hawkins, get your Marine Raiders prepped for close quarters action. Full stealth loadout. Meet me in the armory in 5. As the ship's 3D printers whirred to life, fabricating the Marines' cutting-edge armor and weapons, Briggs studied a holographic schematic of the dreadnought. The central detention block was the most likely place they'd be holding Phillips, but getting there would be a bitch. They'd have to fight their way through dozens of Prilorian kill teams. Briggs set his jaw. One way or another, they were getting Phillips out. They had to. The fate of Harvest, of the whole damn war, hung in the balance. 15 minutes later, Briggs stood with his hand-picked team of raiders in the launch bay. Their matte black stealth armor seemed to drink in the light, rendering them little more than shimmers in the air. Each Marine clutched a pulse rifle, a sleek, deadly weapon that fired magnetically accelerated rounds at hypersonic speeds. Briggs nodded to the pilot of their stealth shuttle. Take us in, Lieutenant. Hug their hull, stay in their blind spots. As the shuttle slipped out of the bay, Briggs turned to his team. Listen up, Marines. We get one shot at this. We go in quiet, locate Phillips, and extract him before the Prilorians know what hit them. Hoorah! Ura! The Marines chorused, the war cry echoing in the confined space. The shuttle ghosted through space, its reflective hull baffling Prilorian sensors. It matched course and speed with the dreadnought, sidling up to the warship's armored flank. At Briggs' signal, the pilot maneuvered them over an auxiliary airlock. The shuttle's IFF transponder pinged the Prilorian systems with stolen codes, and the outer doors opened with a hiss. Briggs was the first one through the airlock, his boots slamming onto the deck plates. The Marines fanned out behind him, pulse rifles leveled and ready. The corridors were dark and narrow, lit by pulsing red light. The air stank of ozone and alien musk. They moved swiftly and silently, the adaptive camo of their armor shifting to match the walls. Briggs held up a fist, and the team froze. Ahead, guttural voices sounded, a Prilorian sentry team on patrol. Briggs pointed to 2 of his Marines, then at the intersection. They nodded, slinking forward. There was a muffled pop of suppressed pulse fire, then a meaty thud. The voices cut off. Briggs moved up, scanning the fallen Prilorians. Their carapaces were shattered, ichor pooling on the deck. Clean kills. They pushed deeper into the ship, guided by the stolen schematics. Twice more they encountered Prilorian kill teams, and twice more they neutralized them with ruthless efficiency. But Briggs knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. Sooner or later, the Prilorians would realize they had intruders. They reached a heavily armored hatch, sealed with a flickering force field. According to the schematics, this was the high-security containment zone. Briggs motioned to Corporal Vega, their tech expert. "Get this open, quickly." Vega knelt before the control panel, his gloved fingers flying over the keys. Sweat beaded his dark face as he worked to slice the alien encryption. With a low hum, the force field disengaged and the hatch rolled open. Briggs took point, pulse rifle at the ready. The chamber beyond was cavernous and shadowy, lit by the same hellish red light. Banks of alien machines lined the walls, covered in blinking diodes and pulsing conduits. And in the center, suspended in a crackling field of energy, was a human figure. Phillips. Briggs started forward, But before he could take a step, alarms blared throughout the ship. The Retribution's cloaking device had failed. They were exposed. And the dreadnought knew they were here. The deck shuddered as the Prilorian warship opened fire, unleashing the full fury of its arsenal on the Retribution. Even through layers of metal and insulation, Briggs could hear the dull booms of impact, feel the bone-jarring concussions. His jaw tightened. Nash would give them as long as she could. But they were out of time. They had to move now. Briggs raised his rifle and charged into the containment chamber, the Marines close on his heels. Prilorian guards boiled out of hidden alcoves, plasma rifles spitting blue fire. The raiders returned fire, superheated slugs screeching through the air. Alien bodies hit the deck, thrashing and squirming. A plasma bolt sizzled past Briggs's head, close enough to scorch his helmet. He dropped the shooter with a 3-round burst and sprinted for the energy field. Phillips hung limply in the crackling aura, his face bruised and bloody. Briggs couldn't tell if he was alive or dead. "Vega!" Briggs shouted over the chaos of the firefight. "Get him out of there!" The corporal raced to the control panel, fingers flying once more. With a descending hum, the energy field powered down, and Phillips collapsed to the deck plates. Briggs reached him in 2 long strides, pressing his fingers to the man's neck. A pulse, weak and thready. Thank God. Briggs keyed his comms. "Nash, we've got him. Prep for emergency evac." Static crackled across the line, interspersed with the booming of enemy fire. "Negative, Captain," Nash shouted, her voice tight with strain. "Our shields are failing. We can't hold them off much longer." Briggs gritted his teeth. They were trapped, caught between the Prilorian guards and the guns of the dreadnought. He looked down at Phillips, battered but breathing. They'd come too far to fail now. The Retribution bucked and heaved as the Prilorian assault intensified, the dreadnought's weapons tearing into her hull. On the bridge, warning klaxons blared and damage reports flooded in. Commander Nash clung to the arms of the command chair as the ship lurched, her knuckles white. "Reroute power to forward shields," she barked, "and get me a firing solution on that dreadnought's main battery." The bridge crew scrambled to comply, their faces sweat-streaked and tense. The view screen showed the titanic Prilorian warship looming before them, its hull pockmarked with missile impacts and scorch marks. But still it came on, implacable and relentless. Nash steeled herself, watching the tactical display. The Retribution's quantum torpedoes were locked and ready, but they'd only have one shot, one chance to buy Captain Briggs and the Marines the time they needed. "Fire!" A salvo of glowing torpedoes erupted from the Retribution's forward tubes, screaming across the void. They slammed into the dreadnought's shields in blinding flashes of light, sending ripples of energy cascading across the barrier. The shields flickered and held. Nash cursed under her breath. It wasn't enough. The dreadnought's defenses were too strong. They needed another plan, and fast, because if those shields didn't come down, none of them were getting out of here alive. On the Prilorian ship, Briggs hauled Phillips to his feet, slinging the semi-conscious man's arm over his shoulders. The Marines formed up around them, pulse rifles blazing as they cut a path through the onrushing guards. The deck shook with the thunder of the dreadnought's guns, the impacts growing more violent by the second. Briggs knew Nash was throwing everything the Retribution had at the Prilorian warship, but it wouldn't be enough, not against a behemoth like that. They needed a miracle. And then, through the smoke and chaos, Briggs saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows, a glint of metal. A figure emerged, tall and lean and distinctly human. It was clad in a battered pressure suit, a helmet obscuring its features, and clutched in its gloved hands was a Prilorian plasma rifle. The figure raised the weapon and opened fire, bright bolts of energy scything into the Prilorian ranks. The guards turned, surprised by the new threat. The figure moved like liquid lightning, darting and weaving between shots, the plasma rifle spitting a constant stream of fire. Briggs stared in shock as the guards fell, one after another. The figure was a one-man army, a whirlwind of destruction. It was like nothing Briggs had ever seen. And then the helmet turned, and Briggs saw the face beneath. A face he knew all too well, even battered and bruised as it was, a face that had haunted his dreams for years. "Phillips," Briggs whispered, "how—" But there was no time for questions. The Prilorian guards were closing in, and the Dreadnought's guns were hammering at the Retribution's failing shields. They had to move. Briggs keyed his comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Nash, we're heading for the shuttle. Be ready to punch it the second we're aboard." "Understood, sir." Nash's voice was strained, edged with desperation. "Hurry!" Briggs turned to the Marines, to Phillips. The man he'd thought was their only hope, now revealed as something else entirely. Something impossible. But that could wait. Right now they had a ship to catch and a war to win. "Let's move," Briggs said, and together they plunged into the fray, pulse rifles and plasma fire lighting their way, towards escape, towards survival. Towards a reckoning that had been a long time coming. Will's vision blurred, his breath coming in ragged gasps as Tharos loomed over him. The Prilorian's eyes glinted with malice, his clawed fingers twitching towards Will's temples. "I have resisted admirably, human," Tharos hissed, "but now I will tear the secrets from your mind, one agonizing memory at a time." Will gritted his teeth, bracing for the psychic onslaught. He felt Tharos's presence forcing its way into his thoughts, a slimy, repulsive intrusion. In the mindscape, Will stood on a barren plain, wind whipping at his face. His mental avatar was clad in tactical gear, a M4 carbine clutched in his hands. Tharos materialized before him, a towering reptilian horror with razor fangs and dripping claws. The air between them rippled and surged as Tharos hurled a bolt of psychic energy. Will threw up a barrier, feeling it buckle under the assault. He retaliated with a burst of fire from his M4, but the rounds pattered harmlessly off Tharos's scaly hide. "Pathetic," Tharos sneered. "Your primitive mind is no match for my power." The Prilorian's next attack shattered Will's barrier, sending him tumbling across the mindscape. Tharos pressed his advantage, ripping into Will's memories. Will screamed as he felt cherished moments with Thor, his SEAL training, the colony's secrets all being shredded and scattered. Through a haze of agony, Will heard a bark, a familiar, impossible sound. He looked up to see a black Labrador retriever bounding across the mindscape towards him, Thor looking just as he had in life. "Good boy," Will whispered, tears tracking down his face. "You came—" Thor nuzzled his hand, warm and solid and real. Will didn't know if this was Thor's spirit drawn across the veil or a projection of his own desperate psyche. But as he looked into those loyal brown eyes, he felt a surge of love and strength. Will stood squaring his shoulders as Thor pressed against his side. Tharos regarded the pair with disdain. "How touching," the Prilorian mocked. "The human and his pet reunited. It will make it all the sweeter when I destroy you both." Tharos raised his claws, dark energy swirling around them. But this time Will was ready. He drew on Thor's presence, on the unbreakable bond between them. He met Tharos's attack head-on, pouring every ounce of his will into the counter-strike. To Tharos's shock, his psychic blast rebounded, the backlash tearing through his own mind. The Prilorian reeled, screeching in pain and fury. Will advanced, Thor at his heel. With each step he turned Tharos's own psychic energy against him, driving spikes of memory, Thor as a puppy, their first hunt together, evenings by the fire, into the Prilorian's brain. "This is for Thor, you son of a bitch," Will snarled as he and Thor shattered the final remnants of Tharos' psychic probe. In the physical world, Tharos staggered back from the interrogation table, black ichor streaming from his nostrils. His eyes were wide with disbelief and a hint of fear. Will slumped in his restraints, exhausted but triumphant. He could still feel Thor's comforting presence in his mind, a steadfast guardian. Tharos opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the walls shuddered with the unmistakable boom of breaching charges. Alarms blared and Prilorian soldiers shouted in the corridors beyond. The door to the interrogation chamber dented and buckled, then blew inward with a flash of light and smoke. Figures in black armor poured through the breach, pulse rifles crackling. The Marine raiders had arrived. The containment chamber erupted into chaos as Captain Briggs and his Marines stormed in, pulse rifles blazing. Tharos's elite guard met them head-on, plasma fire crisscrossing the room in a deadly light show. The Prilorians fought with reckless abandon, heedless of their own safety. But the Marines were a well-oiled machine. They moved with practiced precision, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire and steadily pushing forward. Briggs ducked behind a control console as a plasma bolt sizzled overhead. He popped up, dropping 2 Prilorians with tight bursts from his rifle. "Push up!" he roared over the din of battle. Amidst the swirling smoke and flashing muzzle flares, Briggs caught sight of Phillips. The engineer hung limply in the interrogation chair, his face a mask of bruises and dried blood. Briggs's jaw tightened. He signaled to his squad to lay down covering fire and sprinted towards Phillips. He was halfway there when a dark shape lunged from the shadows. Briggs had a split second to register Tharos's snarling visage before the Prilorian slammed into him like a freight train. Briggs's rifle went skittering across the deck as they hit the ground in a tangle of limbs. Tharos lashed out with his claws, trying to rip open Briggs' throat. Briggs blocked the strike and retaliated with an elbow to Tharos's jaw. They rolled across the floor, grappling furiously. Tharos was strong, his muscles like coiled steel, but Briggs had trained in hand-to-hand combat since he could walk. He weathered Tharos' assault and methodically worked for a dominant position. Briggs trapped Tharos's arm in a joint lock and torqued hard. Tharos hissed in pain as Briggs leveraged him into a pin against a sparking console. "It's over," Briggs grunted, applying pressure. "You've lost." Tharos thrashed and bucked, his eyes burning with hate. "This is only the beginning, human," he spat. "We will hunt down every last one of your kind and burn your worlds to ash." Briggs leaned in close, his voice low and dangerous. "This is for Philip's dog, you son of a bitch." He reared back and slammed his forehead into Tharos's face with a sickening crunch. The Prilorian's eyes rolled back in his head, and he went limp, out cold. Briggs staggered to his feet, his head ringing. Around him the firefight was winding down as the Marines mopped up the last pockets of resistance. Briggs staggered over to Phillips and quickly released his restraints. "We're getting you out of here, Will. Just hold on." Phillips blinked up at him, his eyes unfocused. "Briggs?" he croaked. "Is that really you?" "In the flesh. Now let's move before more of these bastards show up." Briggs slung Phillips's arm over his shoulder and half-carried, half-dragged him towards the exit. The Marines formed up around them, laying down a withering barrage of suppressing fire as they fell back to the shuttle. The deck shuddered beneath their feet as the dreadnought's internal defenses came online, auto turrets emerging from the walls and raking the corridor with laser fire. The Marines' armor sparked and smoked as they absorbed the hits, but they gritted their teeth and pushed on. They piled into the shuttle, the hatch slamming shut behind them. The pilot punched the thrusters and they rocketed out of the hangar, weaving and jinking to avoid the flak bursts filling the void. On the Retribution's bridge, warning alerts blared as the dreadnought's weapons hammered at their quantum shields. Nash watched the readouts with a grim expression, her knuckles white on the arm of the command chair. "Shields at 20%, the tactical officer reported, his voice tight with strain. "We can't take much more of this." Nash leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Reroute all power to forward batteries, and get me a targeting solution on their main engines." The crew scrambled to comply, their fingers flying over their consoles. On the view screen, the dreadnought loomed like a monstrous predator, its hull pitted with scorch marks from the Retribution's quantum torpedoes. "Torpedoes locked," the weapons officer called out. Nash nodded, her jaw set. "Fire!" A salvo of quantum torpedoes erupted from the Retribution's forward tubes, leaving glowing contrails as they streaked towards the dreadnought. They impacted along the warship's aft section in blinding flashes of light, sending gouts of molten metal and debris spiraling into space. Nash watched the explosion blossom across the view screen, her heart in her throat. For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly, The dreadnought's engines flickered and died, leaving the massive ship drifting and powerless. A ragged cheer went up from the bridge crew. Nash allowed herself a tight smile. "Damn fine work, people. Now let's bring our boys home." As if on cue, the stealth shuttle glided into the hangar, settling onto the deck with a hiss of hydraulics. The Marines emerged, battered and weary, but alive, and supported between them, his face pale but his eyes bright, was Will Phillips. Nash keyed the intercom, her voice ringing out across the ship. "All hands prepare for emergency FTL jump on my mark." She waited until she received confirmation that the shuttle was secure, then turned to the helmsman. "Punch it." The helmsman input the coordinates and pushed the throttle to maximum. The Retribution's FTL drive spooled up with a rising hum, space-time distorting around the ship's hull. Just as the sensors detected multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace nearby. Prelorian reinforcements. The Retribution vanished in a flash of cerulean light, leaving only a fading energy, signature in its wake. In the medical bay, Phillips lay on an exam table as the ship's doctor fussed over him, running scans and injecting him with nanite boosters. Briggs stood nearby, his arms crossed over his chest. Phillips looked up at him, his expression raw with emotion. "Thor," he said hoarsely, "Tharos killed him, Briggs, right in front of me." Briggs laid a hand on Phillips's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "I know, Will, I'm so sorry. Thor was a good dog and a brave one. He saved a lot of lives." Phillips nodded, blinking back tears. He was the best, the very best. He took a shuddering breath, then met Briggs's gaze, his eyes hardening with determination. "Thor's sacrifice won't be in vain, Briggs. When Tharos was in my head, I saw things. Plans, schematics. The Prylorians are preparing for a major offensive, something that could turn the tide of the war in their favor." Briggs leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What did you see, Will? Tell me everything." As Phillips began to recount the details of his vision, his voice growing stronger with each word, Briggs felt a flicker of hope kindle in his chest. The war was far from over, and the road ahead would be long and hard. But with the information Phillips had brought back, they finally had a chance to strike back against the Prylorians and bring an end to this bloody conflict. And through it all, Briggs knew the memory of a brave dog named Thor would be with them, driving them forward, giving them strength when all seemed lost. Because that was what heroes did, whether they walked on 2 legs or 4. They inspired others to fight on, no matter the odds. Briggs smiled to himself as the Retribution hurtled through the void, carrying them home. The Prylorians had no idea what was coming for them, but they would learn, soon enough, the true meaning of humanity's resolve. And the indomitable spirit of one very good dog. Will sat in a stark, brightly lit room, deep within a secure military facility. A panel of stern-faced officers, their uniforms crisp and adorned with gleaming medals, faced him across a metal table. Will's own clothes hung loose on his frame, a testament to the weight he'd lost during his captivity. "Start from the beginning, Mr. Phillips," the lead interrogator said, his voice cool and professional. "Every detail you can remember." Will took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists on the table. The memories of his torture at Tharos's hands were still raw, like jagged shards of glass in his mind. But he forced himself to focus, to push through the pain. The information he'd gleaned from Tharos's mind could turn the tide of the war. He began to speak, his voice hoarse at first but growing stronger as he recounted his ordeal. He described the Prylorians' brutal interrogation techniques, the mind-altering drugs and neuronic arrays they'd used to try to break him. He spoke of the psychic resonance chamber, where Tharos had attempted to tear the memories from his brain. The officers listened intently, their expressions grim. They knew the stakes, knew how desperate the Prylorians were for any advantage in the war. During the telepathic probe, Will said, his voice tight with emotion, "I saw something, a plan, a strategy. The Prylorians are going to attack New Sparta." The room erupted into a buzz of activity, the officers conferring urgently with each other. New Sparta was a vital human colony, a key stronghold in the sector. If the Prylorians took it, They could cut off supply lines, launch devastating strikes on Earth itself. "How certain are you of this information?" the lead interrogator asked, leaning forward. "Certain enough to bet my life on it," Will replied, his jaw set with determination. "We need to reinforce New Sparta, and fast. If we lose that colony, we lose the war." The interrogator nodded, his eyes hard. He turned to his colleagues, issuing rapid-fire orders. "Dispatch a fleet to New Sparta immediately. I want every available ship in the sector converging on that colony. This is our top priority." As the officers scrambled to comply, Will spoke up again. "I'm going with them." The interrogator paused, eyeing Will critically. "Mr. Phillips, you've been through a tremendous ordeal. You need time to recover, to heal." Will shook his head, his expression fierce. "What I need is to see this through. The Prilorians took everything from me, my home, my friends, my dog. I won't rest until I've made them pay." The interrogator hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Very well, I'll inform Captain Briggs that you'll be joining his crew on the Retribution. Your insights could prove invaluable in the coming battle." Will felt a grim sense of satisfaction as he stood to leave, ignoring the protests of his battered body. Thor's memory burned bright in his mind, a spur driving him forward. He would fight, for the fallen, for the living, for vengeance. The Retribution hung in space at the head of a massive human fleet, its quantum shield shimmering against the starry backdrop. Will stood on the bridge beside Captain Briggs, watching the readouts with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL," the sensor officer reported, her voice tense. "Prilorian ships, a whole damn armada of them." Briggs leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "On screen." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sea of angular, predatory shapes emerging from the depths of space. And at their center, looming like a monstrous shark among minnows, was a ship Will knew all too well. "That's the dreadnought from Shadow Bastion," he breathed, his heart pounding. "The one where they held me." Briggs cursed under his breath. "It looks like they've upgraded her. Those aren't the same specs we faced before." As if in response to Briggs's words, the dreadnought's hull shimmered and shifted, revealing rows of new weapon emplacements bristling along its flanks. Will felt a chill run down his spine, remembering the cold, merciless gaze of Tharos as he tortured him. Somewhere on that ship, he knew, the sadistic Prilorian commander was waiting, hungry for revenge. "All ships, battle stations," Briggs barked, his voice ringing out across the bridge. Klaxons blared as the crew scrambled to their posts, the deck thrumming with the surge of power to the weapon systems. On the view screen, the Prilorian fleet began to advance, their formations tightening like a noose around New Sparta. The dreadnought surged ahead, its engines flaring like the eyes of a demon. "They're powering up weapons," the tactical officer reported, his fingers flying over his console. "Reading a massive energy surge from the dreadnought. It's like nothing I've ever seen before." Will leaned forward, his heart in his throat. He had a sinking feeling that whatever the Prilorians were about to unleash, it would change the face of the battle, and perhaps the war itself. The dreadnought's prow split open, revealing a gaping maw that crackled with eldritch energy. A beam of blinding white light erupted from the ship's core, lancing out across the void. The human fleet scattered, desperate to evade the searing lance of destruction. But they were too slow, too closely packed. The beam caught a frigate amidships, and the vessel simply vanished, disintegrating into a cloud of molten debris. "Quantum resonance cannon," the sensor officer shouted, her face pale. "It's disrupting our ship's systems, leaving them dead in space." Will watched in horror as more human ships fell victim to the Prilorian weapon, their hulls shredding like tissue paper as the beam swept through their ranks. The Retribution shuddered as a near miss overloaded its shields, consoles sparking and crew members staggering. "Evasive maneuvers," Briggs roared, gripping the arms of his command chair. "Get us out of that thing's line of fire." The helmsman wrenched the ship into a desperate spiral, the inertial dampeners straining to compensate. On the view screen, The dreadnought loomed ever larger, its shields shrugging off the Retribution's answering volleys like raindrops. Will felt a surge of despair as he watched the battle unfolding. The Prilorians had outmaneuvered them, outgunned them. Even with the intel he'd brought back, it seemed they were powerless against the enemy's new weapon. And then, in a flash of sudden clarity, he remembered something else. A pattern he'd seen in Tharos's mind during the telepathic probe, a complex web of frequencies and harmonics. At the time, he'd dismissed it as meaningless noise, a side effect of the mental battle. But now, as he stared at the readouts of the dreadnought's shields, he realized the pattern was identical. The Prilorians were using some kind of quantum resonance to reinforce their defenses, the same principle behind their devastating cannon. Will shot to his feet, his heart pounding with sudden hope. "Captain, I have an idea. I think I know how we can breach their shields." Briggs turned to him, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "During the interrogation, when Tharos was in my mind, I saw a pattern, a sequence of frequencies that matches the dreadnought's shield harmonics. If we can disrupt that resonance, we might be able to create an opening." Briggs hesitated, weighing the odds. Then he nodded, his jaw tight with determination. "It's worth a shot. We're out of options." Will sprinted from the bridge, racing through the ship's corridors to the quantum computer core. His fingers flew over the interface, inputting the pattern he'd seen in Tharos's mind. He could only pray that his hunch was right, that this desperate gambit would turn the tide of the battle. Around him, the Retribution shook and shuddered as the Prilorians pressed their attack, the ship's hull groaning under the strain. Will gritted his teeth, his focus narrowing to the glowing lines of code scrolling across the screen. This was their last chance, their only hope. He couldn't fail, not now, not with so much at stake. As the final sequence slotted into place, Will felt a surge of exhilaration mixed with dread. The quantum resonance pattern was uploaded, ready to be broadcast across the fleet. If it worked, if they could break through the Prilorian shields, they might still have a chance. If not, if he was wrong, Will shook his head, banishing the thought. He couldn't afford to doubt, not now. Thor's memory burned bright in his mind, a talisman against despair. He would see this through, for his friend, for all the fallen, for Earth itself. Will took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the activation key. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of the war, of humanity itself, rested on his shoulders. He thought of Thor, of the sacrifice his loyal companion had made. He thought of Captain Briggs and the crew of the Retribution, fighting with every ounce of their strength and courage. He thought of the billions of lives hanging in the balance, on Earth and across the stars. And with a final silent prayer, Will pressed the button, sending the quantum resonance pattern surging out into the battle. The die was cast, the gambit played. All that remained was to see if fortune favored the bold or the desperate. Will's fingers flew over the quantum computer's interface, inputting the pattern he'd gleaned from Tharos's mind. He held his breath as he hit the final key, praying that his desperate gambit would pay off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the Retribution shuddered as power surged through its weapons systems. The ship's railguns and plasma cannons thrummed with newfound energy, their barrels glowing white-hot. On the bridge, Captain Briggs watched in amazement, as the readout showed the dreadnought's shields fluctuating, their harmonics disrupted by the quantum resonance pattern. He slammed his fist on the armrest of his command chair. "All ships, focus fire on the dreadnought. Exploit those shield weaknesses." The human fleet responded with a barrage of concentrated fire, their weapons now punching through the dreadnought's defenses like they were made of paper. Explosions blossomed across the massive ship's hull, venting atmosphere and debris into the void. Aboard the dreadnought, Tharos snarled as alarms blared and consoles sparked around him. He whirled on his crew, his eyes blazing with fury. "Divert all power to the quantum resonance cannon. We will crush these humans once and for all." As the cannon began to charge, its barrel glowing with an eerie blue light, the Retribution's sensors screamed a warning. Briggs leaned forward, his face grim. "They're going for a final strike. We've got one shot at this." Helm, bring us about. Tactical, prepare a full spread of quantum torpedoes. Time their detonation to coincide with the cannon's firing sequence. The crew responded with crisp efficiency, their hands flying over their consoles. On the view screen, the dreadnought loomed like a monstrous predator, its cannon pulsing with destructive energy. Torpedoes locked on target, the tactical officer reported, his voice tense. Briggs nodded. Fire! A volley of quantum torpedoes burst from the Retribution's launch tubes, their warheads flickering with an otherworldly glow. They streaked towards the dreadnought, closing the distance in heartbeats. Just as the dreadnought's cannon reached critical charge, the torpedoes impacted. For a moment, there was a blinding flash of light, as if a new star had been born. Then, a cataclysmic explosion engulfed the Prilorian ship, shattering its hull and sending debris spinning in all directions. The shockwave slammed into the Retribution like a physical blow, throwing the crew to the deck and shorting out consoles in a shower of sparks. Will clung to a bulkhead, his teeth gritted as the ship bucked and heaved. As the light faded, the crew staggered to their feet, blinking spots from their eyes. On the view screen, the dreadnought was a shattered husk, drifting lifelessly in the void. Cheers erupted throughout the bridge, the crew embracing each other in relief and triumph. But Will didn't join in the celebration. He stared at the wreckage of the dreadnought, feeling a hollow sense of loss. Even with this victory, it wouldn't bring Thor back. Nothing could. Suddenly an alarm blared from the sensor console. The officer frowned, then turned to Briggs with a look of surprise. Captain, we're detecting a small craft emerging from the dreadnought's debris field. It's a Prilorian shuttle, heavily damaged but still functional. One life sign aboard. Briggs strode over to the console, his brow furrowed. Can you get a positive ID on that life sign? The officer nodded, her eyes widening. It's Tharos, sir. He's alive, but barely. Briggs exchanged a glance with Will, a silent understanding passing between them. Bring that shuttle aboard. I want a full squad of Marines in the hangar bay, weapons hot. If Tharos tries anything, put him down hard. As the Retribution's tractor beam locked onto the battered shuttle, pulling it into the hangar bay, Will felt a surge of emotions, anger, anticipation, and a grim sense of purpose. He knew that Tharos could hold valuable intelligence about the Prilorians' plans and capabilities. But more than that, he wanted to look the bastard in the eye, to make him answer for what he'd done. The hangar bay was a hive of activity, as the shuttle settled to the deck, Marines taking up positions around it with weapons drawn. Will stood at the front, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm, his face set in a stony mask. With a hiss of hydraulics, the shuttle's hatch opened, and there, slumped against the wall, was Tharos. His once proud form was broken and burned, his uniform in tatters. He looked up at Will, his eyes glazed with pain and something else. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. "Mercy," Tharos croaked, his voice a ragged whisper. "Please." Will felt his hand tighten on his sidearm, the weight of the choice before him settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. He could end it here, with a single shot. Pay back the pain and suffering Tharos had inflicted on him, on Thor, on countless others. But as he stared into the Prilorian's eyes, he saw something else there, a flicker of regret, perhaps even remorse. And in that moment, Will knew that pulling the trigger would be easy. It would feel good even, but it wouldn't be right. He let out a slow breath, his hand falling away from his weapon. "Get him to the brig," he said to the Marines, his voice rough with emotion, "and call the medics. I want him alive for questioning." As the Marines hauled Tharos away, Will turned to face Briggs, who stood watching with a look of understanding on his face. "You made the right call," the captain said quietly. "We're better than them. We have to be." Will nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that there would be more battles to fight and sacrifices to make. But he also knew that as long as humanity held fast to its ideals, to the values that made them who they would never lose their way. And with the memory of Thor at his side, He knew he would never walk that road alone. Will's hand shook as he aimed his sidearm at Tharos's head. His finger hovered over the trigger, every muscle tensed with the desire to squeeze off a shot. Memories of Thor's broken body flashed through his mind, the pain of loss still raw and bleeding. Tharos stared up at him from where he knelt on the hangar deck, his reptilian eyes reflecting the harsh lights overhead. Will searched those eyes for any sign of defiance or malice, any excuse to end the bastard's life and claim his vengeance. But instead, he saw something that made him hesitate. A flicker of emotion, buried deep beneath the layers of pride and hatred. Regret. Remorse. A realization of the suffering he had caused, the lives he had destroyed. In that moment, Will saw a glimmer of humanity in his enemy, a spark of the same qualities that separated his own kind from the monsters they fought. His finger eased off the trigger, his arm lowering slowly to his side. He took a shuddering breath, feeling the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. If he killed Tharos now, in cold blood, he would be no better than the Prilorians. He would betray everything he fought for, everything Thor died for. "Take him to the brig," Will said, his voice rough with emotion. He stepped back, allowing the Marines to haul Tharos to his feet and escort him away. As the Prilorian was led out of the hangar, Captain Briggs approached Will from behind. He placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder, a gesture of silent support and understanding. "You made the right call," Briggs said quietly. "We're better than them. We have to be." Will nodded, watching as Tharos disappeared through the hatchway. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that true peace would take more than just a single act of mercy. But it was a start. In the days that followed, Tharos proved to be an invaluable source of intelligence. Under questioning, he revealed critical weaknesses in the Prilorian command structure, as well as the locations of hidden shipyards and supply depots. Armed with this knowledge, the United Earth Defense Council launched a series of lightning raids deep into enemy territory. Strike teams hit the Prilorians hard and fast, destroying vital infrastructure and crippling their ability to wage war. The Retribution led the charge, its guns blazing as it tore through enemy formations like a hot knife through butter. With each victory, the Prilorian grip on the sector weakened. Their fleets fell back, their armies retreated. Whispers began to circulate among the ranks, rumors of a powerful new human weapon that could pierce their strongest shields. As the tide of the war turned, the Prilorian leadership realized that they could no longer hope to win. With their forces in disarray and their supplies dwindling, they had no choice but to seek terms. A delegation arrived at Harvest Colony under a flag of truce, requesting a meeting with human representatives to discuss an end to hostilities. The United Earth Defense Council, seeing a chance for lasting peace, agreed to the talks. Will found himself on the neutral planet of Axiom, seated at a table across from Prilorian diplomats. He had never imagined himself in such a position, a miner turned soldier turned peacemaker. But fate had a way of surprising even the most jaded of men. As the negotiations dragged on, Will's thoughts drifted to Thor and the countless others who had given their lives in the war. Human and Prilorian alike, they were all victims of the same cycle of violence and hatred. He knew that breaking that cycle would take more than just words on paper. It would take a fundamental change in the way both sides saw each other. During a recess in the talks, Will found himself face to face with Tharos once again. The Prilorian looked different now, his once proud bearing replaced by a quiet humility. He extended a clawed hand, his eyes meeting Will's with a new understanding. "I was wrong about your kind, human," Tharos said, his voice rasping. "You have shown strength and nobility beyond measure. In your place, I would have slain me without hesitation. Your mercy has taught me much." Will hesitated for a moment, then reached out and clasped Tharos's hand. He felt the weight of history in that simple gesture, a bridge across the gulf of hatred and misunderstanding. "Mercy is the hardest thing to give," Will said softly. "But it's what separates us from the beasts. If we lose that, we lose ourselves." As the talks concluded with the signing of a historic peace treaty, Will stepped outside and looked up at the stars. He imagined Thor looking down on him from whatever afterlife existed for loyal dogs, his tail wagging with pride. "We did it, buddy," Will whispered. "We found a better way, and I'll make sure your sacrifice is never forgotten." The war was over, but the scars it left behind would linger forever. Will returned to Harvest Colony, his head held high as he stepped off the transport shuttle. The miners erupted in cheers when they saw him, their voices echoing through the cavernous landing bay. They crowded around him, patting him on the back and shaking his hand, their faces beaming with pride and gratitude. Will smiled and nodded, accepting their praise with quiet humility. He had never sought fame or glory, but he knew that his actions had given hope to the people of Harvest. They saw him as a symbol of humanity's strength and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. In the weeks that followed, Will settled back into his old routine, donning his work suit and heading out to the mines. The familiar hum of the drilling rigs and the clank of metal on rock brought a sense of comfort and normalcy that he had sorely missed. One day, as he explored a remote canyon on the outskirts of the colony, something caught his eye. Nestled in the shadows of a towering cliff face was a strange structure, its walls pockmarked with scorch marks and jagged holes. Will approached cautiously, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. As he drew closer, he realized that it was a Prelorian outpost, long abandoned and forgotten. The door hung off its hinges, creaking in the wind. Will stepped inside, his boots crunching on the shattered remnants of consoles and equipment. In the dim light filtering through the holes in the roof, he spotted a blinking console, its screen cracked but still functional. Will tapped a few keys and a holographic display flickered to life, revealing a log entry from the outpost's commander. As he read the words, a chill ran down Will's spine. The outpost had not been a mere military base, but a secret research facility dedicated to experimenting on alien species. The Prelorians had been abducting creatures from across the galaxy, subjecting them to horrific tests and genetic modifications. Will's heart nearly stopped when he saw a reference to a Terran canine specimen. The log described how the creature had shown remarkable resilience and adaptability, surviving experiments that had killed dozens of other subjects. With a sinking feeling, Will realized that the specimen could only be one animal, Thor. Tears welled in Will's eyes as he read the details of the experiments, each more cruel and inhuman than the last. Thor had been subjected to painful surgeries, his DNA spliced with that of Prelorian war beasts. The log spoke of the subject's incredible strength and ferocity, but also of the haunted look in its eyes. In the end, Thor had managed to escape the facility, but not before the experiments had taken their toll. The log mentioned that the creature had been altered and unstable, a far cry from the loyal and gentle companion Will had known. Will's grief and anger boiled over, his fists clenching until his knuckles turned white. Thor's death had not been a senseless act of violence, but the result of a systemic evil that ran deeper than he ever could have imagined. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, Will made a vow. He would expose the truth of what the Prelorians had done and fight to ensure that such atrocities could never happen again. He would be a voice for the voiceless, a champion for all those who had suffered at the hands of cruelty and injustice. Will's first step was to bring his evidence before the United Earth government, the revelation sending shockwaves through the halls of power. Some called for immediate sanctions against the Prelorians, while others urged caution and further investigation. But Will refused to let the matter be buried or forgotten. Using his newfound influence as a war hero, he lobbied tirelessly for the creation of an interspecies council, a neutral body that would monitor and regulate all contact between civilizations. "Never again," Will said in an impassioned speech before the assembly. "Never again will we allow the strong to prey upon the weak or the innocent to suffer in silence. We must stand together, human and alien alike, to build a galaxy where all beings can live free from fear and oppression." The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Some factions, both human and Prelorian, opposed the idea of the council, fearing a loss of power and autonomy. There were heated debates in the halls of government, and even threats of violence from the most radical elements. Through it all, Will remained steadfast in his conviction. Driven by the memory of Thor and all those who had been lost, he attended endless meetings and negotiations, working tirelessly to build bridges and find common ground. But even as he fought for a better future, the ghosts of the past continued to haunt him. Late one night, as he pored over reports in his cramped office, Will received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. The sender claimed to have proof of ongoing Prilorian experiments, even more horrific than those revealed in the outpost logs. Will's heart raced as he read the coordinates attached to the message, his mind torn between caution and the burning need to uncover the truth. In the end, he knew he had no choice. He had to see this through, no matter the cost. The coordinates led Will to a remote asteroid field, far from any charted space lanes. As he approached in a small, unmarked shuttle, he noticed a faint energy signature emanating from one of the larger rocks. With a sense of growing dread, he realized that it was a trap. A barrage of plasma fire erupted from hidden turrets, slamming into Will's shuttle and sending it careening out of control. Alarms blared and consoles sparked as he fought to regain control, his teeth gritted in determination. Through the cracked viewport, Will caught a glimpse of his attackers, a squad of Prilorian soldiers, their armor painted with the insignia of a rogue faction. They were the bitter remnants of the old regime, still clinging to their dreams of conquest and domination. Will's shuttle crashed on the rocky surface of the asteroid, the impact throwing him hard against the restraints. He tasted blood in his mouth as he stumbled out of the wreckage, his vision blurring at the edges. The Prilorians were on him in seconds, their weapons spitting fire and death. Will dove for cover behind a jagged outcropping, his heart hammering in his chest. He returned fire with his sidearm, the shots ricocheting off their armor with bright flashes. But it was a losing battle, and Will knew it. He was outgunned and outnumbered, his body battered and bleeding from a dozen wounds. As he slumped against the rock, his life ebbing away into the cold vacuum of space, his thoughts turned to Thor. He remembered the warmth of Thor's fur against his cheek, the unconditional love and loyalty shining in those brown eyes. In that moment, Will knew that he had fought the good fight, that he had given everything he had for the ideals they both believed in. As his vision faded to black, Will felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He had lived a life of purpose and meaning, and he could only hope that his sacrifice would not be in vain. In the years that followed, Will's dream of an interspecies council became a reality. The organization, known as the Galactic Alliance, worked tirelessly to promote understanding and cooperation between all civilizations and to protect the rights of all sentient beings. At the first meeting of the Alliance, a single seat was left empty in the Great Hall, a tribute to the man who had given everything to make it possible, and on Harvest a statue was erected in Will's honor, depicting him standing tall and proud, with Thor at his side. The inscription at the base read, "In life they were inseparable, in death they are eternal. May their courage and love light the way for us all." As the twin sons of Harvest sat behind the statue, casting long shadows across the dusty ground, a faint shimmer could be seen at its base. For a moment, it almost looked like the ghostly figure of a dog curled up at the feet of its master. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shimmer was gone, leaving only the silent sentinel of stone and metal, a testament to the enduring power of friendship and sacrifice. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.